The Baltic strategy was born 2 years ago due to the European Commission, the Swedish presidency, and all the Council of Ministers, and if I may say so, to the European Parliament. And this really is my message to you today, and the practicality of seeing this child grow up into a rather tetchy, difficult teenager. This is a dreadful time, as all parents know. Either they go completely off the rails and they don't turn up in the morning when they should, or they turn into leaders of industry, leaders of their communities. And we have to nurture them through this strategy, through this difficult, awkward teenage period. We need really I was going to say a father figure. I think we need a grandmother figure. You know, when you're a teenager and you're in trouble with your parents, your grandmother gives you a quiet little glass of brandy. She says, "Don't worry about it, Christopher. You should have seen your father when he was your age. What a bloody fool." And that's a serious point. That's my first proposal. I've mentioned this to Chairman Ellemann Jensen. And this comes from the European Parliament. We discussed this a number of years ago, that we do need a figurehead. And this is a really serious point. As well as everybody working in the field, the Commission, the stakeholders, the political level is important. Somebody who can speak face to face with prime ministers and presidents, and yes, kings, the heads of state. The current chairman of the Baltic Europe Intergroup, Tuni Keelam, cannot be here today because there is a plenary session in Strasbourg, but he specifically asked me to make this point, that we consider, at least, appointing a rotating presidency of the Baltic strategy, rotating around the 8 EU member states, people, for example, of the background and the status of the former president of Latvia, Vika Freiberger, whose contribution I need not refer to, except back to courage. She had to flee her country as a 12-year-old girl. The Red Air Force came down and they strafed the fleeing columns. So literally, she and her family had to jump into the ditch to avoid this form of attack. And yet she is the most sophisticated, articulate, academic person who's represented a country. Well, maybe somebody of that nature for 1 year could take a role with the Baltic strategy, just to make sure that, for example, my Prime Minister, Mr. David Cameron, doesn't start asking difficult questions about funding, or what about the British rebate, or what about this, or what about that. Somebody will say, yes, okay, we'll discuss this issue, but let's remember the Baltic strategy. And it's not the only strategy. We've got the Danube strategy. We've got the Union for the Mediterranean. The marvelous documentation which you've supplied us with shows that this model of macro-regional development can be adapted and spread in a different way to suit the conditions across the entire EU. We're no longer a community of 6 member states, 27 member states and Croatia, etc. So we really do, I think, have an obligation to ensure the success of the Baltic strategy, to give hope to the others. And certainly in the Parliament, the members of the Baltic Intergroup will meet with their Danube and Mediterranean colleagues to exchange ideas, best practice. Final point. The Parliament in its resolution, and the Commission, I thought at one point, agreed on funding. We're told no new funding, no new institutions, etc. But a small element to help seed corn at the beginning, the coordinators of the flagships, seems to me, and certainly to the European Parliament, to make an awful lot of sense. It's a small amount of money, but it could make the difference between success and dismal failure for many of these really important work. Not people with lots of money in capital cities, but the peripheral regions. And let's bring our help and advice down to them. Don't expect them to pick up the phone and talk to Brussels, or even talk to Helsinki. We can have European information centres in the regions, so that somebody who's maybe experienced some difficulty can pick up the phone to a friendly face at the other end who he knows, or even meet for lunch and sort out the problems. Ladies and gentlemen, that's more than enough from me. Thank you, a huge thank you for this conference. I think, in fact, I know that this, in a sense, marks the beginning of the end of the teenage phase, and we look to true maturity and success for the Baltic strategy, so that, projecting into the future, ladies and gentlemen, 50 years' time, people would say, what was all that stuff about the Cold War?